Welcome to Think Diverse, a fresh and deep look at the issues surrounding diversity and inclusion. I'm your host, Catherine De Vries, and I'm a Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at Bocconi University. In every episode, I will pick the brain of one of my Bocconi colleagues about their research about diversity and inclusion topics. This is all to understand how diversity manifests itself in our daily lives, our society, and our economy. Today, we investigate the other half of the pandemic, how COVID-19 hit women harder and why sustainable recovery has to include policies that allow women to reconcile their professional life and their family workload. My guest is Paola Profeta, full professor of public economics and director of Bocconi's AXE Research Lab on gender equality. Paola has recently coordinated a study commissioned by the European Parliament, which concludes that the crisis endangers the results already achieved in terms of gender equality, in and outside the labor market. Paola, thank you for joining us at Think Diverse.
Thank you, Catherine, for inviting me.
So I wanted to begin by asking you what prompted you to study the effect of COVID-19 on gender equality, both in and outside the labor market.
Yes. So when the pandemic exploded, it was pretty clear that women were going to suffer a lot from the COVID-19, and women were on the front line in the fight against COVID-19 because women are highly employed in hospital, for example. But it was also quite clear, almost soon, that they would have suffered from job losses and from restrictive measures such as the lockdown that imposed a change in family relationships. So I have been studying this gender equality and women empowerment since many years. I mean, I spent the last 15 years of my life doing research on this. So it was very clear that that was a particular moment. So it was natural for me to try to understand what were the gendered consequences of the pandemic.
Yeah, so very clear. It's clear that, someone working on gender equality kind of saw already what was going to happen, and partly also in the pandemic and what we know. But also in your recent work, you've kind of also said that the pandemic might trigger a vicious circle that actually makes it harder to relaunch female employment. Could you basically explain a little bit what you mean by that?
Yes, exactly. So we know that gender gaps are a reality, especially in the labor market, in economic participation, mainly the presence of women on the labor market, and also the political dimension, but that's another story. So we know that in our countries, even though women are now more educated than men, still we have problems when it comes to participation to the labor market. For example, in Italy, very few women work and actively participate to the labor market. So the pandemic is problematic because of at least two reasons. So first of all, differently from previous crises, such as the financial crisis or other economic crises, that were mainly a men's session. So they were crises particularly strong against men's labor market participation because they were hitting sectors such as industry, finance, where a lot of men are employed. Here with the pandemic, we have a very new thing, which is the fact that the service sector is the one most strongly hit, and this is what we also document in our work and papers across the countries. And so this is particularly risky for women because women are disproportionately employed in the service sector. So that's the first factor. The second one is that the pandemic and the restrictions related to the pandemic imposes a change in family relationships. So in particular, the amount of time devoted to domestic work, childcare, and everything related to the family increased a lot. And our research shows that this was not proportionately, let's say, divided or shared between men and women in couples in the family, but it mainly fall on women. So this risk exacerbating already pre-existing differences in the allocation of time devoted to the family with respect to the labor market, etc. And we know from also other studies that we have conducted that equal sharing within the family is a first pillar or a first, let's say, fundamental factor which increases the probability that women work on the labor market, work full time, work when they are mothers, and also have children. So this was really these two aspects were particularly critical. So we also know that when women lose somehow their power within the family, in the leadership position, in decision making. So if they don't have equal responsibilities with respect to men, this is a problem for what we are going to decide in terms of policies to support families, policy support, women's participation to the labor market, actions that have to be taken. And therefore, this may create a vicious circle of less opportunities and less, let's say, possibilities for next time and next generation. And on the other side, when we have equal sharing and we also have equal presence of women in decision-making positions with respect to men, this increases the possibility that we implement policies and we think about women's needs and the possibility to combine family and work and invest into this type of measures and policies. So that's the problem of the vicious circle. And I think we are in a very, let's say, problematic situation. We are really there. There are a lot of risks from the pandemic. There is also the opportunity because we know that things are going to change and we will move from the pandemic to new system and to new investments, and there are more resources now, etc. But so we need really to balance the risks and the opportunities and try to make the opportunities more important than the risks.
So it's very clear from your answer that the current pandemic situation might endanger the results that we've achieved in the past when it comes to gender equality. Would there also be a particular number or statistic that you could share with us that gives a kind of better picture of this phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, the number that I always like to remember, it's a little bit, related to Italy, but I think it's strong. And it's the fact that it's a number of 50%, which is the female employment rate in Italy. So around 1 out of 2 women work in Italy, which is one of the most developed country in the world in terms of many other indicators, and we know. And so and 1 out of 3 in the south. So when you have 50% of the population, because women are not a minority, they represent 50% of the population, and 50% of them are not actively involved in the labor market. So that's a number that suggests you how critical is the phenomenon. So we are really losing something and even wasting talent, because remember also that women are more educated than men. So they invest into human capital, but then at some point something happens so that we cannot capitalize or get the returns in terms of the economy and the society overall from this investment. So this is the critical number. And the other important number is that no country in the world has achieved gender equality. Even the most advanced countries, they have closed, there is a precise number, they have closed around 80% of the gender gaps. That's the estimate from the World Economic Forum, which is a lot, but still far from 100%.
Exactly. And also it shows that there will be still 20% of talent and innovation and different ideas that are not going to be touched. So you've argued indeed that the pandemic as you've alluded to, has made it more difficult for women also to be leaders. Is there another case of waste for talent and businesses and governments coming out of this?
Yes, of course, because we know that there are clear advantages or beneficial effects of a gender balanced leadership. So when we have a gender balanced leadership in business and in politics and in governments, there are at least three positive effects. The first one is in terms of the selection. So if you select from an enlarged pool of talent, so both men and women, and you select the leader among an entire pool of talent, both men and women are considered, it's obviously more likely that you are going to find the more appropriate one, so the best one. So the quality increases. And so if we don't, because we only select from half of the population, the quality is by definition lower. So we know that there are a lot of examples and research in this direction. This is a clear important factor. The second element is related to performance. Gender balanced leadership is associated with better results, with better performance. And we have also some anecdotal evidence during the pandemic. So we know that countries led by women performed a little bit better with respect to those led by men for among several indicators. And but this is a more general result also in terms of institution, firms, government. So we know that performance is typically associated with a more gender balanced leadership, which does not mean that we get rid of all men and only put women, but we need to find a better balance. And the third element is related to the agenda. So when we have a more gender balanced leadership, it's clear that some items are part of the agenda. Not only, so the agenda is not unbalanced towards issues that concern only men, let's say, but it's clear that it's more complete. Also in terms of strategies and in terms of style of leadership, because we know, for example, that women tend to have a longer time horizon when they take their decision. And this is true also when we look at decision-making positions, so both in business and in government. And during the pandemic, that was also quite clear because, for example, we can also observe a kind of relationship. Of course, it's not causal result, but there is an association between countries characterized by a better, a more balanced, a more gender balanced leadership and the decisions that they have taken, for example, about school closures.
So just also to kind of connect to your research on another level, is there a particular person that you met during your research that has impacted you and that really is, you're laughing, so maybe there's a...
Yeah, that's, I cannot say. There are a lot of people that I met, obviously on personal tone. That the first one was my husband, because we met while doing research on this and previous topics. So that's a personal story.
Great. That's really nice. And also both a man and a woman studying gender equality related issues. So you already talked a little bit about the importance of government and also how maybe gender balanced leadership has an effect to that. Could you also maybe allude a little bit into which policies that might have been suggested to improve female conditions in societies, which are now more urgent and which could really help us to have a more inclusive and sustainable recovery?
Yes, that's a real important part, because after the She session, we are trying to design or to plan a She recovery. So try to use this gender balance, the concept of more inclusion of women into the economy and in leadership position for relaunching the economy after the pandemic. So of course, there are a lot of things that have to be done. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have a very unbalanced welfare state. So the first thing is to invest a little bit more into family policies, into childcare services. So everything that make it easier for women to participate to the labor market while being mothers and while also developing their personal and professional life. It's also true that there is no unique, especially in some countries which have lost a lot of time during the last decades in terms of these policies, there is no unique policy or one measure that solves the problem of everybody. Unfortunately, this is not the case, not in this case, but also in many others. So there is no unique solution or a magic recipe. But I think that there are points that have to be made very clearly: investing into childcare, investing, for example, into a paternity leave in order to balance a little bit more within the family, within the couple, and sharing responsibility from the beginning when the child is born is important as a first step, because, as I said before, sharing within the family is immediately reflected into sharing in the labor market. It's also what we also need is cultural actions. So try to change a little bit stereotypes, bias, implicit and explicit bias that we still have in many societies with respect to gender roles and to traditional gender roles. There is also action. We have also worked a lot in other projects on the equal pay directives that is also at the European level. So there is this idea that we need also to invest in the direction of providing equal pay, which means that we need some activities at the firm's level. So not only at to support women's participation to the labor market and career, but of course, when we think about these issues, there is an important side of the story, which is what firms do. So we need also to give firms the right incentives for paying men and women at the same level equally, and have an incentive to produce data, results, indicators that show that they value men and women equally in their organization.
Great. So also as a Dean of Diversity, some quite clear ideas about also how to think about these problems. So next to your kind of very rich and important research, you also are the director of the AXA Research Lab on Gender Equality here at Bocconi, and you attracted a group of very young and talented researchers who are, tackling different aspects of the equality issue. And what are kind of some of the most important and promising strands of study that you're conducting?
Yes, I'm very proud of this because we were able to finally, it was not easy, but finally to have a research unit which is really engaged on this topic with a very high level research in terms of academics, but also in terms of policy implications. So at the moment, at the AXA Research Lab on Gender Equality, we have 3 postdocs researchers. All of them are really very good and doing very interesting research. So I would just mention briefly their areas of expertise. They complement each other. So first of all, we have Caroline Colley, and she studies mainly the labor market. One of her recent very influential paper is trying to understand how the labor market conditions, and in particular the workplace, the organization of the workplace, matters for women. So starting from the suggestion of the movement of Me Too, which we all know what it is, she was able to identify something which is not a good news, but we have to understand and explain and study, something which is called the double penalty for women when they suffer abuse on the workplace. They are also more likely to leave the job. So that's an important result, because we need to avoid the situation on the workplace and to improve how the workplace works, because otherwise there will be enormous costs, not only for the women involved, but in general for the firm and for the economy overall. Because if they stop working and leave their their jobs, etc., that's an enormous cost for the society. The second person who works at the lab is Silvia Griselda. Silvia is particularly interesting and doing very important research in the field of education. We all know that women are more educated than men. I mentioned this even before, but there are large differences in terms of the field of studies. In particular, there is a scarcity of women in the so-called STEM disciplines. So science, technology, engineering, and math. So everything related to math is considered less appropriate for women. And so Silvia studies this exactly. So why do we observe few women in STEM disciplines, and also what we can do to have a more balanced presence of men and women in these fields of study. The third person working at the lab is Giulia Savio. Giulia is more interested in political economy and in general in the presence of women in politics. So we all know that there is a clear problem also of underrepresentation of women, not only in business and in firms, but also in politics. And so what are the best measures to promote a better participation of women in politics and the representation of women? We all know that there are a lot of measures that have been studied by the literature. So, for example, gender quotas, but with Giulia, we have studied also other mechanisms targeting, for example, the voters, such as the double preference voting condition of gender, which has been introduced in Italy, which is another way to express preferences for men and women, and for trying to push towards a higher representation, a higher presence of women in politics. And there are also actions more at the cultural level, more in terms of stereotypes and culture. And to this respect, Julie is able to link, let's say, this type of arguments also to other contexts. So not only in politics, but also in science or other contexts where we still observe that there is a difference between men and women in their representation, and also in the influence and the impact they may have on the society.
Well, that's a very kind of promising lines of research that are coming out of the AXA Research Lab on Gender Equality. So really thanks also for summarizing that. So, I mean, kind of in a final question, Bocconi's motto is knowledge that matters. So what do you think is some of the key takeaways for society or for, politics, business that you've highlighted of your research?
Yes, that's a motto for Bocconi, but I think, with this type of research, we really are into something that matters. It's a kind also of mission for me, the fact that we need to propose or to develop rigorous and serious academic research, but with an impact on the policy. And I think I can give you some examples of what I have recently done in my research with a clear impact also on people's life somehow. So a first example is related to the introduction of gender quotas. We know that in Italy we have recently introduced gender quotas for boards, for corporate boards, but this is also a policy which has been applied to the political context and other contexts. So we have at the lab we have extensively studied the impact and the consequences of the introduction of gender quotas in boards and in politics, and we have found important consequences also in a little bit let's say controversial, so a little bit different from the common wisdom. So the common idea is that you impose quotas and the quality decreases, and so firms are going bad, or there are negative impact because these people are not well prepared or experienced. So we actually found exactly the opposite. So the quality was increasing, and I think this is a kind of visible result because it means that we can use this instrument to break the glass ceiling, helping not only a few women who are going to enter some decision-making positions, but also in general, because if the quality increases and improves, that's good for everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Paola, for sharing your research with us. Thank you all for listening. This was Think Diverse, a podcast on diversity and inclusion from Bocconi University. To be notified about new episodes, subscribe to Think Diverse on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Spreaker.